We'll be talking about natural disasters. Why do they occur? The various disasters that we've seen, floods, earthquakes, major storms. There's two types of hanhagot. In God's world, there's two kinds of systems and two very different kind of systems that Kadosh Baruch Hu does his business, if we may call it so. One is called din and one is called rachamim. Din is justice and rachamim is mercy. And whoever studied a little bit of Kabbalah perhaps remembers the concept of 10 sefirot, the 10 attributes of God. Attributes meaning there are various ways that he conducts himself. And some of them involve justice and some of them involve mercy. Then there's even one that's in between. It's called chesed, kindness. How can kindness be something in between? It's a midah shememazeget din verachamim. It combines the attributes of din and rachamim in a way that some things may appear to us to be bad, but in reality they are for our benefit. The typical example that I like to give is the individual who's going through an operation to remove his leg because of an infectious disease, gangrene. If we don't remove his leg, it will spread throughout the entire body. Are we doing him a favor by removing the leg? Of course, it may be cruel, it may even involve no anesthesia. It may be very painful, but this will save his life. So there are various ways that Kadosh Baruch Hu conducts himself in this world, and some of them involve pure justice, some of them are pure rachamim, pure mercy, and some of them involve a combination of the two. And even though we don't understand what is going on, our tradition tells us that everything is for our benefit, everything is for our good. And in the end, only when Mashiach comes will we understand everything that there is to understand. It is not possible for us to know everything there is to know. As I've explained in the past, the human mind is limited. Hashem's ways are very different than our ways. Hashem's mind works different than the mind of the human being. We don't therefore fully understand, we don't fully comprehend, and we will never be able to grasp why things happen the way they is, but we have some clues. We definitely have some ideas, what is mentioned in the Torah, what is mentioned in the Kabbalah, and that is what I will share with you tonight. You may recall that on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem is called Melech. He's called a king. He's always a king. But on certain days of the year, he's called a king. When is that? During the time of the year when there is judgment. So he sits in a seat of justice and he judges the world. And certain actions are taken as a result of that judgment. At other times he has different names, different attributes, different actions are taken. All of these are of course actions from Hashem, but they are characterized or they appear in different ways depending on what needs to happen. But all of that is still from Hashem. Even though it's true that Hashem created nature, and it's a fact, you can prove it scientifically that nature has certain rules or laws that it follows. Everything is supposed to be beautiful. Everything is supposed to function properly. But sometimes freaky things occur. I guess we can call it that, no? It's just weird. It's strange. What is it? Something strange? Instead of having a 15-mile-an-hour wind, we have something that goes at 300 miles an hour. We have hurricanes and tornadoes, and they are destructive. This is the same nature that is supposed to follow some rules, and here it's breaking its rules. How does this happen? Well, in the very, very beginning, when God created the world, He put certain conditions in this nature that is following certain rules. Just like the earth, it rotates on its axis at all times. It's following certain rules, right? Everything else in the world follows certain rules. But for some reason, these rules are sometimes broken. In order for nature to break its rules, its own rules, Hashem must have put it in the very beginning, made it a condition. You will be able to break your rules in a given time, if the circumstances are right, if I decide so. In other words, it's built into the very order of nature to be able to break that order, to break the rules. So when nature freaks out, it's breaking its rules. And why is it breaking its rules? Because man is breaking its rules. When man misbehaves, when man does not do what he's supposed to do, then nature in some ways reminds him So we're not talking yet about a punishment here. We're not talking about kaparat avonot, atonements. We'll mention that later. Right now we're talking about something that is happening in nature that is reminding the human being, hey, this is you. This is what's happening in nature because this is what you're doing to yourself. Nature is being destructive because you are being destructive. You are breaking the rules, so nature is breaking its rules. And that message has to hit home, of course. Sometimes we don't understand what they're doing is wrong, so Hashem has to let us know one way or another. So Hashem uses some of His tools to deliver this message is through nature. And what part of nature does Hashem use? Hashem uses volcanoes, uses tidal waves, uses tornadoes, uses hurricanes, uses all sorts of destructive forces. And He has many, to carry His message. And here's an example. You'll see another clip of some very powerful winds. Very short clip, but this is an incredible amount of energy that is being directed against the town. Hundreds of miles an hour. Winds that are very powerful, that can destroy anything in its way. Okay. And as you know, the power of floods, as you've seen with the tsunamis, they can do a tremendous amount of damage. What are all these? So we say it in the Siddur, Ki malachav. No, not Ki malachav etzaveh. Ki malachav, he makes of his angels ruchot, esh lohet. In other words, the ruchot and the esh lohet, the fire and the powerful winds, are all angels, are all destructive angels. They're all malachei chabala, or mashchitim as they're called. These are angels, destructive angels. You know, we see a very powerful wind. We see an immense fire that's covering a large area in Southern California. What is that? It's an angel. It seems strange to call it an angel, but yes, it's a destructive angel. Malach shemechabel, malach mashchit, as it's called in Hebrew, that is doing the will of Hashem. And through these actions, what does Hashem prove? First of all, He shows His greatness. He shows that He is in control. And He reminds us of how weak we are, how we don't have control. They've tried to figure out ways to stop hurricanes by dropping a nuclear bomb at the eye of the hurricane. And then they decided not to do it because the bomb may do more damage than the hurricane. The human being, the scientists eventually see that they cannot confront these incredible forces of nature. They cannot stop them. So this somehow is supposed to remind us of how weak we are, how limited we are, how we don't have complete control and we can't run away from these forces of nature. So it's supposed to humble us. That's one idea behind them. But besides humbling us, one of the ideas behind every disaster is to awaken the Jew and the Gentile that what he's doing is wrong, that something is obviously wrong. There's something that needs to be corrected. Otherwise Hashem would not allow His beautiful world to be destroyed. He has no interest to bring tremendous large waves that destroy entire towns. There's no reason for that. If it happens, obviously there's a reason from above. Perhaps we can turn back on the lights? Yeah, the light. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In order for us to know clearly that these things come from Hashem, the Chachamim compose certain blessings, certain berachot, that we say when we hear thunder or when we see lightning. Whether it's Oseh Maaseh Bereshit, or whether it's Kocho Gvurato Maleh Olam. All of these blessings are for what? This blessing is not necessarily to give thanks, like when we eat something, we give thanks to Hashem. The blessing is to remind us that this is the power of Hashem, that Hashem rules the world, He did not only create the world, He continues to supervise the world. And that is what the blessing is for, is to remind us. Rabbis also tell us in the Gemara that the whole idea of why Hashem made thunder. What's thunder? Again, the scientists may have their own explanation. But the reason behind thunder is leyasher et hakmumiyut shebalev. The heart is sometimes corrupt or crooked. The heart comes along this thunder and is intended to straighten us out a little bit, to shock us a little bit. And that's what it does. That's what it's supposed to do. So everything has a reason, everything has a purpose, even something like thunder. Otherwise, what's the purpose of thunder? What does thunder do to the world? Anybody have any ideas of what the usefulness of thunder is? Is it useful to any of you? No, it's scary, if anything, right? Especially when it hits you right above you. And you just think that the lightning hit your own house. What is Mazeh?
What's the use of thunder above the ocean? There's no man.
No, we talked about nature. We talked about that Hashem put certain laws into nature. Yesh klalim bateva. There are certain rules in nature. And nature functions in a certain way regardless of where it is. It could be where there's no people, in Antarctica, in the North Pole. Nature is everywhere. Hashem did not limit the laws of nature just to the United States. It's everywhere. You're going to have rain in the ocean too. The ocean doesn't need so much rain. We need the rain over here. Right? But you have rain everywhere. So you have nature everywhere. But what is the idea behind it? What usefulness does it have? Well, when it hits close to home, it's supposed to awaken us to certain realities. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's two kinds of conducts. There's din and rachamim. Judgment is a very difficult attribute. And when Chas v'Shalom, that happens on a collective scale, in other words, when it affects an entire country, an entire region, it's very difficult to run away from it. Hashem had to send an angel to get Lot out of Sodom v'Amorah. Remember the story of Sodom v'Amorah, how they were destroyed? Hashem could have left Lot there too. You know what, Lot, you stay there. You stay. And I will destroy all the homes around you except for your home. Isn't that possible for Hashem to do? Hashem can do anything He wants. Right. Hashem could have done that too. Why did He do that? He had to remove Lot from the disaster of Sodom v'Amorah. Yes. What's the reason for that? Because in order for a person to stay in a place which is going to be completely destroyed and he's going to survive, he needs to be a big tzaddik, very righteous man, and have many merits. Lot for sure did not have them. The only thing he had was enough to save his life. In other words, get out of town. You do not have the merit. You do not have the merit to see everybody being destroyed, and you are not affected whatsoever. So whenever there's judgment on a collective scale, affecting the entire region, entire country, it is very, very powerful. And therefore, if somebody is there, it's very almost impossible for him to be saved. There is a saying by the rabbis, Mishenitna reshut lamashchit leashchit or lemechabel leashchit eno mavchin ben tzadik lerasha. Once permission is given to the destructive angel to go out and destroy, he does not distinguish between a tzaddik and a rasha. In other words, once it is ordered that a particular town be destroyed, whether it was in World War II or elsewhere, there's no distinction. Even the good people may suffer. Because once you're talking about something on a grand scale, a large city, for that one or two good people who don't deserve this, for them to be saved, it requires a tremendous amount of intervention from above. Of course, it can happen. Intervention can occur. And from time to time it does occur, but it's much more difficult. You need a tremendous amount of zchuyot, merits, to be able to escape. Now, how it will happen that you escape? Well, it just happens to be that Hashem put it in your mind to catch a flight right before the earthquake hit. Imagine somebody was a big tzaddik living in Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. Imagine. Hashem could have put it into his mind, you know what, why don't you go for the weekend to Tokyo? Tokyo, was of course a safer place to be. It wasn't the safest, but it was safer. So he got on the train, and sure enough, as soon as he got to Tokyo, his entire city is bombed by nuclear bombs. Who put it into his mind? Hashem. But what did we say before? There are no coincidences. Things happen for a reason. So of course Hashem can do that, but it's much more difficult when an entire city is going to be destroyed, an entire town. There's almost nobody getting out of it. And therefore even tzaddikim collectively suffer the same fate as those who are wicked. Not because they deserve it. They don't deserve it. Because they're there and they're at the wrong time in the wrong place. Exactly. You're being associated with bad people. You're there, you're stuck. Next time don't be there. But sometimes Hashem does intervene. But usually, no. It is therefore very difficult to escape this kind of judgment when it affects on a collective scale, an entire community, an entire city. Sometimes, however, Hashem brings about a disaster that does not have too much fallout. In other words, not too many people are hurt, and it's only intended as a warning. What's a typical example of a major, let's call it a major disaster, okay, that does not produce casualties? An earthquake, 3 on the Richter scale. I think that's a good example, no? An earthquake, the land shook, but it's only a 3 on the Richter scale. Most of you would not even feel it. But if you were there on the fault where it hit, you would feel it. What would it do? Well, if it's the middle of the night, you would wake up. And you may be even scared. And maybe even some of the books would fall off their shelves. So depending on what happened, it could be very scary, but there are no casualties. What is there? Only fear. And that is exactly what was intended. Remember the missile attacks on Israel, the Scud missile attacks? Just about nobody was injured. Nobody was affected physically. 10,000 apartments were damaged. An incredible open miracle. It was really miraculous. What was it intended for? Was it intended to inflict casualties? No. It was intended to awaken the Jews that there's obviously something that's wrong and they're asleep. Now what could have happened is that Hashem could have allowed all those Patriot missiles that America sent to shoot down those Scud missiles. And they would have been pretty effective. They're pretty good, those Patriot missiles, but they didn't work. Somehow, for some reason in Israel, those Patriot missiles did not do their job. Why not? Because had they done their job, Yitzhak Rabin and the entire government would have sent a thank you letter to George Bush Sr. Thank you very much. And we forgot Mr. Shamir too. He was the Prime Minister then. They would have sent a thank you letter to Mr. Bush. Thank you very much for Patriot missiles. They did it. They knocked down those missiles. Now that they didn't work, who should they give thanks to? To Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's what they should be doing all the time. But we forget sometimes who to give the credit. So the missiles did not work. Otherwise, the opposite result would have happened. Now, sometimes what happens is a hanhaga, as we said before, of rachamim, of complete mercy. And when you have complete mercy and you don't have any judgment whatsoever, then you have open miracles. Rachamim. When you have deen, we said it's very destructive, even the innocent suffer. When you have rachamim, you have incredible miracles. In this last battle in Lebanon, you had a mixture. You had incredible miracles in the north, and you had, unfortunately, casualties too. It is not a contradiction for the two hanhagot to work together, because there are various messages or there's various actions that Hashem wants to take care of, which we'll talk about next. What is exactly accomplished with all these missiles, with all these bombs, with all the natural disasters, other than just attempting to awaken those of us who are asleep. So let's begin with the punishment. There is a concept called punishment, but punishment is not the way we understand it to be. The way we use punishment is you were a bad boy, you're going to get punished. In the Torah it is very clear that when a punishment is delivered, it's leman yishme'u v'yirau, it has to have a deterrent effect, that they should not repeat this in the future. Plus it has the effect of kapara, of atoning. Plus what we said before, it's supposed to have the effect of awakening us. So in the end, the rabbis tell us, if you want to figure out why certain things are happening, we'll give you a list of the major disasters in the world, and we will tell you what usually they're associated with. For example, major earthquakes have to do with homosexuality. And if you want to know why, I'll tell you some other time. Major fires that destroy large areas, especially if homes and people's lives are lost, it has to do with Hilul Shabbat. Well, obviously Hilul Shabbat, what does Hilul Shabbat have to do with Malibu, you may ask? Well, there are not too many Jews. Well, maybe there are. It's not necessarily the only reason, but that is one reason. Hilul Shabbat, the desecration of the Sabbath in Israel, or wherever there are Jewish communities, if there is a big fire, you can blame, and you can investigate, of course, that perhaps there's a lack of respect for Shabbat. Or there could be a lack of justice, corrupt justice. In other words, if the glove does not fit, you should acquit. Remember that? Mm-hmm. What happened right after that? A major fire broke out. Major fire broke out because of corrupt justice. If justice is not done, things happen. Hashem does not tolerate the lack of justice in this world. Machloket, if there's many arguments. And in Eretz Yisrael, of course, there are additional reasons of why things happen. They say that the major earthquake that occurred in Sfat a little over 150 years ago was due to the fact that they were not respectful of Yerushalayim. Everybody went to move to Sfat, to live in Sfat, and they completely abandoned Jerusalem. So there was a tremendous earthquake in Sfat. Just about the entire city was destroyed. Many people lost their life. And the rabbi said that it has something to do with the kavod of Yerushalayim. That people just left Yerushalayim, didn't care about moving to Yerushalayim. And this could have, of course, brought about an accusation. This would not be perhaps the only reason, but it could be an additional reason of why that earthquake took place. A little over 150 years ago. Yeah.
Kavod means the respect.
The respect and the honor. Right. We've spoken a little bit about natural disasters, but sometimes no natural disasters are necessary. Sometimes what people suffer is a loss, a financial loss. A financial loss or a certain illness. And it doesn't have to be through nature, it could be through other human beings. For example, terrorists, like we saw in the film. War. The effects of war and the effects of terrorism can also be experienced by people. Even though it may not affect the entire region, it affects only one street, it affected only one block, or affected only one restaurant. Nevertheless, people are still aware of it. The effects, the physical effects may have been limited to one location, but what this did mentally to all those who observed it, who were around, who heard about it, it's supposed to have an effect on them too. There is a list of disasters, different kinds of disasters in Pirkei Avot, and the reasons for why they occur, why there are wars, why there are earthquakes, why there are different kinds of disasters. You can look them up in Pirkei Avot and have an idea of why these things happen. Then you have the category of mitot b'dei shamayim, death in the hands of heaven. Rabbis tell us, even though today we don't have the jurisdiction, we don't have the Sanhedrin to carry out the death penalty, we still have the arba mitot, bedin. The four types of death that Sanhedrin would carry out if necessary, and it was usually very rare. were Sekila, Serefa, Herek, Vechenek. Sekila means stoning, but it's not the way we understand it. We don't just throw stones at someone. They would be thrown off a second story building. Serefa is putting down the throat of an individual's hayav serefa, hot lead, which would burn his intestines. Herek, the head would be chopped off or decapitated. And Herek, he would ultimately suffocate by the use of some scarf that would be applied. In any event, these are not cruel deaths. They were intended to be very quick and not painful. And of course, the ultimate idea behind these deaths were to bring about a kapara, an atonement for the individual who did whatever he did. Now, we don't have a Sanhedrin today, so the rabbis tell us, don't think just because we don't have a Sanhedrin that these 4 types of deaths do not exist. They still happen. If somebody, Chas Shalom, gets killed in a car accident, that is a form of sekilah. If somebody drowns, it's a form of chenek, of suffocation. Now, don't quote me, I did not necessarily say over here that everybody who got killed in a car accident deserved sekilah. It's not necessarily so. But if he needed to die through sekilah, that may be one way that it would happen. Doesn't mean everybody that drowned needed to go through chenek, but it's definitely a form of chenek. If somebody needs to have chenek, this would be something equivalent to chenek. So Arbeh Shlichim Lamakom, Rabbi tells us Hashem has many messengers to carry out His will, and these things still happen from time to time. And the common denominator of all of this is that there is a reason for everything, and nothing is by chance. Somebody does not give enough tzedakah. That could also result in something. Rabbis tell us that one of the reasons why there is hunger in the world, or why there's not enough rain, is because of a lack of charity, a lack of tzedakah, a lack of ma'aser. That brings about hunger. In other words, what we gather from all of this is that every time somebody gets hit, or he gets stung, whether it's by a bee, or a scorpion, or by anything else, mosquito, even if your wife hits you, yeah, there's a reason for that. Not because she's upset at you. There's another reason. Rabbis tell us that Hashem uses the woman against the man if he's misbehaving. One day she wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, right? And he must have done something wrong. Well, there's all sorts of situations. I just gave one example. It could be that she's very unhappy about something too. But otherwise, it can happen that a person will receive a reminder from the most unlikely source. That's because something that he's doing is not right. Some of you perhaps may have heard of the term midah keneged midah. We need to explain that a little bit. We talked about punishment. We talked about awakening somebody that what he's doing is wrong. But the way it happens when somebody is awakened or he's brought to his senses, he's being punished, how does it happen? It happens midah keneged midah. Midah keneged midah means a measure for measure. In other words, he did something, what he's going to get in return will be measure for measure. Let's say he cheated somebody's going to cheat him. Or he's going to lose money in some way. Because his sin involved money. Right? If he did a terrible sin, would his eyes may suffer. Whatever. Ayin tahat ayin, nefesh tahat nefesh. There are various pesukim in the Torah that clarify this point that everything is midah keneged midah. But what is really accomplished over here if you give somebody measure for measure? The reason why Hashem does measure for measure, reason number one, is because He wants an individual to easily understand what he did wrong. If Hashem sends an earthquake, most people are not going to understand why it happened. An earthquake is difficult to understand. It affects a large area. Right? The rabbis have to tell us what an earthquake is for. But for the most part, everything that happens to a person, if you were to pay attention, he may be able to figure it out. As I told you once, a story of a rabbi that was going down the stairs and he tripped. And he sat down after he tripped, and the students turned to the rabbi and asked him, "Is everything okay?" He says, "Yeah, everything is okay. Then why are you still sitting?" He says, I'm thinking why I fell. I'm trying to figure out why I tripped. And if you think hard enough, you may be able to figure out why certain things happen. There's a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Hillel saw a skull floating on the water. And he expressed himself, you know why you're floating on the water? In other words, you know why you drowned? Because you drowned somebody. What's this whole Mishnah telling us? What's the necessity of the rabbis putting into a Mishnah what Hillel observed? He observed on the river a skull floating. Because you drowned somebody, that is why you drowned. Obviously this Mishnah is to teach us a very important lesson, a lesson in Hashgacha, that nothing happens for no reason. He's floating on the water, he must have drowned somebody. Now what I wanted to add to that Mishnah is the fact that Hillel observed that skull was good. Because perhaps, I don't know what happened in the end, but perhaps he was able to recover the skull and give it a burial. Not everybody has the merit to be buried. You need a special zechut to be found, for the body to be found, if he was killed somewhere, and to be buried. Just imagine how tragic it was for all those who lost their life in the Twin Towers, and some of their bodies were never found. There's no place to visit them on the yard-side. Some of them we don't even know if we can say Kaddish because maybe they left, they're not there, they never showed up. We were assuming that it's very sad, very tragic when there's no closure, as they say, to this tragic event. But we know that there was a reason for it. The Twin Towers, there's some people that didn't make it. Didn't make it, in other words, to work that day. Something held them back. One of them was his daughter. All of a sudden went crazy that morning. She was unhappy about the dress, about her clothing, about her lunch. I don't know what it was. I forgot the details. And the father couldn't go to work until he resolved this matter with his daughter. By the time everything was calm and he went, of course, it was after the fact. If Hashem wants to make a miracle, it's easy for him. But sometimes, unfortunately, we get caught and not everybody survives the tragedy. Now we have come to a very important question, which is really part of the question that has to do with the disasters. Okay, disasters happen for a reason. It teaches us that there is Hashgacha. It awakens us to the fact that we're doing something wrong. Why doesn't Hashem do it immediately? Why does He sometimes wait for years before He carries out the judgment? If something is wrong, take care of it immediately. So, anybody have any suggestions? It's a good question. A lot of people, I'm sure, are bothered by this. Yeah. Remember, another idea behind any suffering is kapara. Kapara is always going to be another idea that regardless of the reasons, regardless of what happens, kaparat avonot is always going to happen. It's always going to be an atonement. Hashem says, you know what? He needs to atone. Maybe he will atone on his own. Why should I do the job for him? Do it the hard way? He might do it on his own. He might do teshuvah. He might beg for forgiveness. He might correct his ways. He may stop what he was doing. He may change his ways. So exactly like you said, Hashem many times gives us a chance and does not immediately come after us with midat hadin to exact punishment for something. Hashem is not interested in that. Ki lo yachpotz b'mot hamet ki meshuvo. Hashem does not want people to die. He wants them to return to Him. So Hashem gives us an orka, He gives us an extension, and waits for us to fix it on our own. Hashem also does not want to immediately inflict any pain, because then it would be too obvious. It will take away our free will. So therefore, He does not immediately do something. Now because something does not happen immediately, guess what happens? The Yetzer Hara fools us, misleads us. You see, nothing happened. Does that sound familiar? Where? With Adam and Chava. What did the Nachash tell her? You see, you just touch it, nothing will happen. Touch the tree. What was wrong with that statement? God never said it's asur to touch the tree. It was asur to eat from the tree. But the Yetzer Hara knows how to mislead, knows how to convince, knows how to tempt. And that is how Adam and Chava fell for it. So sometimes we are misled to thinking, oh, it's okay, it's safe. He drives on Shabbat, he works on Shabbat, nothing happens to him. It must be okay. If it wouldn't be, then Hashem would do something about it. No, Hashem does not always do something about it immediately. There's a lot of reasons why it doesn't happen immediately. Again, we said what? Hashem gives him a chance. Hashem doesn't want it to be obvious, doesn't want to take away the free will. What else? Hashem also judges the situation based on the circumstances. Wait a minute, he doesn't know. He doesn't know. And if I hit him over the head, he may still not know. He grew up in Siberia. He doesn't know what Shabbat is. He doesn't know that whoever works on Shabbat, the money that he made, and he may make a lot of money on Shabbat, it's his best day. All that cash will be spent on lawyers. All that cash will be spent on fixing his transmission, 3 root canals, and some other problem that may come up that he didn't anticipate. He wasn't planning, he didn't budget himself for that. So all that money that he made on Shabbatot, guess what will happen? Throughout the year, somehow, they will disappear. Attorney fees, transmission, root canals, etc. And he doesn't know it. He doesn't know it because it's on the surface. People have root canals, people are sued, you might think, oh, that's just a coincidence. No, all that money was taken away from you. Had you not worked on Shabbat, that money would have stayed with you. That money would have been blessed. You would not have had all these extra expenses. You still may have been sued, but you would have won. As far as root canals, you could have gotten away from it, some other way. All of these extra expenses remove any profit that you may have thought that you could make at the expense of Shabbat. Another reason why Hashem does not always act immediately, not only because the circumstances are as such that the individual may not do something intentionally. There is a difference between doing something negligently, intentionally, or unintentionally. But sometimes there's something called zechut omedet lo. The famous example of zechut omedet lo is with a sotah. Everybody here know what a sotah is? Sotah is a woman who is suspected of having betrayed her husband.
Non-marital relations.
Having had an extramarital relationship. She is at least suspected of it. And she may have. And there's a whole procedure that the husband has to follow by taking her to the high priest, Gadol. There she's given the waters if she doesn't admit. And if in fact she did sin, what would happen? She would swell up and she would die on the spot.
Sometimes up to 3 years.
Yeah. So that is exactly what should happen. And that would happen immediately. In order to deter people, as we said before, there's a little bit of a deterrence here. And in order to separate this woman from this man who may be a good man and doesn't deserve this kind of woman. But sometimes what would happen is she would drink the waters and she did commit a sin and nothing would happen to her up to 3 years. What? 3 years? Yeah. In other words, even though she came back sound and alive, most likely she's okay. But there's always that chance that she did commit a sin, but she has some zechut. She's a tremendous balat chesed. She does tremendous tzedakah and kindness. And some mitzvot are able to keep her alive for a year, for 2, up to 3 years. So you have to really wait 3 years to see if anything happens, to be sure if she was committed a sin or not. Yes?
Rabbi, what about the other way around?
Same thing the other way around. Yeah, but I chose that example because that is the example that the Torah uses. But obviously, the men don't have a free ride. They can't do what they want. If they commit certain sins, they will have to pay for it too. However, when it comes to certain acts, it is much more sensitive for a woman than it is for the man because she's the one that carries the child. And if she, God forbid, commits an act of adultery, it could really mess things up, much more than if a man does so. Because if a man does so with a single woman, not a married woman, then it may not be noticeable. Nothing may happen as a result of that action. But if a woman were to do so, and something would come out of it, a bastard, for example, then it's a tremendous amount of damage was done here, in ways that we cannot even see and understand. So it's much more sensitive for the woman to be involved than for the man. But nonetheless, it's still a sin, it's still wrong, and she's definitely entitled to seek divorce if he's not faithful to her. Zechut is a merit. A merit. What is that?
You said Zechut Omedela?
Omedela.
עומדת לה. זכות עומדת לה, או זכות תלויה. Yeah.
She would like it translated.
What is that?
She would like those words translated.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, so therefore, what are you having? In these situations when the zchut, or a certain mitzvah, is there protecting the individual, what you're seeing is an example of midat harachamim being involved, the attribute of mercy being involved, that delays the situation. Because if everything was completely din, the world would not be able to stay the way it is. Hashem would not offer any extensions, would not prolong anything. So what you're seeing is an example of midat harachamim being involved as well. So now we turn to the Torah. The Torah elaborates a little bit more on these natural disasters. And the Torah tells us that don't think for a moment that these natural disasters have to do with reward and punishment. Because there is no reward for one's deeds for the most part in this world. The rewards are reserved for the world to come. The same is true with punishment. Real punishment, which is a kapara, which is a form of repairing one's neshama, is really reserved for the world to come. So the entire Parshat Bechukotai in Kitavo, which has the tochacha, all that rebuke and all the terrible things that will happen to the Jewish nation, should they not do what's right, should they hashram worship idols. We have a whole script of what to expect. And unfortunately, you know what? We went through all of it throughout our history. All the pogroms and all the persecutions, everything is in the Torah. Unfortunately, everything happened exactly as it is written, as it was told to us. And Hashem warned us beforehand that this will happen. What is this exactly? This has nothing to do with the punishment for one's deeds, which is really reserved to the world to come. The main idea behind any punishment, other than kapara, I mean there's always kapara, other than kapara, is to awaken us. Hashem wants us to awaken us, and if we don't understand it one way, then He comes with a bigger stick, and a bigger stick, and a bigger stick, until we understand. What else? What else is going to work? Hashem does not want to destroy the people entirely. How are they ever going to understand? So, for the most part, other than kapara, all of these Qur'aniyot, all of these terrible decrees that the Jewish people have suffered, have to do with itoreru. Hashem wants us to awaken up. And sometimes He scares us. When did He scare us? In a grand scale? Purim. Right? Purim was a big scare. It was going to destroy everyone. And at the very, very end, of course, Am Yisrael did teshuvah, and that's what Hashem wanted of them. And the rabbis tell us that Hashem never intended to destroy the Jewish people. He only put Haman there to scare them. Of course, Haman intended to destroy them, but Hashem wasn't going to let him get away with it. Hashem never intended. It was only for appearance. Because Hashem wanted something from us. And it came out. The teshuvah came out. That of course, is complete rachamim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has mercy on us, and that is when we are able to see the miracles, open miracles, that we at first don't understand, but in the end, everything makes sense. We've spoken a little bit about the various reasons why natural disasters occur, that they come for a reason, they come to also awaken us, they come as a kapara. However, in the very end of days, right before Mashiach comes, the natural disasters will have an additional meaning. All the major natural disasters, that we're experiencing today, including the tsunami perhaps, and there's more to come, will have to do with what the rabbis tell us as a nekama from the umot ha'olam, as a revenge from the nations of the world, because of all their terrible crimes against the Jews. They have, Hashem says, Yesh li cheshbon aroch, I have a very long record with them, an accounting, a reckoning, and I'm saving it for the end of days. I'm letting them live their lives, have a pleasant life, have a pleasant time, but the time will come when they will have to pay for everything that they did. And we will see with our own eyes what we did not see before, that Hashem is the boss, that Hashem is in charge. Up until now, unfortunately, it appears as a Chilul Hashem. The Goyim say, where is their God? That He's letting us get away with it. That He's letting us destroy His temples. That He's letting us destroy 6 million Jews. Where is their God? And there were many Jews who said, where's God? Where was he during the Holocaust? So in the very, very end, right before Mashiach comes, there's also a tremendous amount of action just to prove this point. I've always been around. There was perhaps a hester panim, I maybe hit my face for whatever reason, but I've always been around. And now you're going to see it in big scale. The Zohar says that in the very early days of the end of days, it's going to be small disasters. And it's going to intensify and more and more and more until it becomes incredibly strong. And the reason why this is happening now again is because there's a cheshbon, there's an accounting, but besides that, what is going to happen when Mashiach arrives? Hara mitchasel. All that is evil will disappear. All that is evil will disappear. And up until now, they've coexisted. Good and evil have coexisted. In other words, they can't coexist, but they've been around together. Evil is about to be uprooted, about to be destroyed. So Hashem therefore brings about all these disasters to uproot this evil, to uproot all these impurities from the world. And what will we have from it, the Jewish nation? For us, it will also be an awakening. Do teshuvah, get ready. Time is running out. Take actions. The last major disaster that affected the entire world was the Mabul. Right? Everybody knows that the flood covered everywhere, covered the entire world, except Israel, according to the Midrash. Now this Mabul, even though it affected the entire world and it was very intense, Hashem swore that He will never do so again. Do what? Bring about an entire Mabul, or entire disaster over the entire globe. So you don't have to be afraid of a tremendous meteor coming down from space like some scientists are afraid of destroying all the human race. Hashem does not have an interest in that. Right? It happened once, it will not happen again. But what will not happen again is on a global scale, but it will still happen on a local scale. In other words, you still have regions and countries that will be affected either by Mabul or by earthquakes. And as we've seen, whether it was in Turkey, Afghanistan, and as you saw the pictures, yeah. What was that? Yeah.
How do you account for potential nuclear war? And where would that?
The same thing. Nuclear war, yes, there may be, but it will be local. It will not affect the entire globe.
Where the atmosphere would be completely...
According to some descriptions, a large portion of the world will be affected in some way, but not the entire world will be destroyed. In other words, there may be a lot of suffering, there may be wars, there may be a lot of pain and fear and all that affecting every corner of the globe, but not that everything will be destroyed. And that's the last point that I'm going to talk about, is how to be sure, or what to do to be saved. Yeah?
What about the Gog and Magog? I mean, I heard that 2/3 of the world should be destroyed.
No, of the world's population. Yeah, according to the prophet, according to Daniel, 2/3 of the world's population will not have the merit to be around when Hashem reveals Himself. Only 1/3.
But then they will be resurrected.
Yes.
They won't be around.
They won't be around. So how will that come about, that they will disappear? In all sorts of ways that this can come about. It can come about, a couple million will go from AIDS, others from birds flu, others from earthquakes. There's many ways that these people can of course, disappear from the scene. Yeah.
Daniel was written before the 12 Troyosa. Troyosa is the last Nevi'im.
That's right.
So why didn't Daniel prophesy things that there were still prophets after him?
No, most of the prophecy of Daniel has to do with the nations of the world, including Babylonia, the various rulers that will rule, and there's definitely a large part of his prophecy that deals with Acharit, I mean the end of days that applies only to the Jews. Most of his prophecy is not for the Beit Rishon, which is already behind him, and not so much for the Beit Sheni either. It's just a great deal of our prophecies have to do with the end of days. As the rabbis tell us, the Jewish people had thousands of prophets, but only those that were necessary for future generations to know were written down. So if Daniel was written down, it's obviously because his message is mostly for the future generation. Yeah.
If there's no choice, there's no human beings or any other angels or
There's no free choice?
There's no human beings, that we are the angels or good.
Right, but there is free will, right? Well, human beings have free will.
But then there's no evil, then there's no free will.
No, well, you're talking about the end of the very end of days. It will be a different kind of world. This world will only last up to 6,000 years, according to our tradition. After which, the blueprint that God has in mind is of a more spiritual world, where there's no evil inclination. And you're right, and you're completely right. There's no evil inclination, so there's a little bit of a lack of free will, but that is only because this is the reward for all the hard work. So we don't want to have the struggles which we would have had we still had the complete free will. Anyway, the reason why we don't have a Mabul like we had then affecting the entire world is because now we have the Torah. It is through the Torah that the world is protected. It is through the Torah that one is able to elevate himself. It is through the Torah that one could learn to do the right things in the eyes of Hashem. Back then there was no Torah. And what happened was that evil was so great that it did not make sense for the world to continue to exist if there was no way for it to repair itself. So Hashem had no choice but to destroy everything. Even though Hashem knew that this would happen, He had reasons of why He allowed this to happen and then destroyed it. But from then on, He says, it will never happen. Not because He doesn't want it to happen. He says, because there will be Torah, there will be a Jewish nation teaching the ways of Hashem to the entire world. So there will be a lot of good, even though there is still a lot of bad. The disaster that will occur before Mashiach will be much greater than before, only to intensify or to increase the greatness of the miracle and to make it more and more obvious and clear to all the nations of the world that these are not just acts of nature, but this is Hashem revealing Himself. So you will see an intensifying of all of this to make it clear to everybody. There are some additional topics that we will cover another time, and that is the topic of Yesh Nispa Belo Mishpat, why there are some people who leave this world before their time, even though they're not guilty of anything. And we'll talk about why children die, even though they're still under the age of bar mitzvah. These are all separate topics. What is the meaning of pain and suffering in one's own personal life? Also, we'll talk about separately. I just want to ask you a quick question. What do you think is better? To go on a plane, the plane goes down, everybody gets killed, and only one survives? Or to be stuck in traffic and not make it to the flight? Which one is a bigger miracle? Which one is a bigger miracle? Yes?
To be on that plane and one
Yeah.
being saved.
Okay, there's two parts to the answer. It's of course a bigger miracle to be on the plane and to have your life saved. But it's a better miracle not to make it to the plane. Because then you've not had to go through the trauma. Anybody that was on the plane and survived out of 400 passengers, he's definitely a tzaddik. He must have done something to survive. It's a big miracle. It's an open miracle. But the one who missed his flight, he's better off. He's on a higher level. Why? Because he didn't even have to go through the pain and suffering. So what this shows is that everything is b'midah. As the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, Akol natum be'eravon. Everything, HaKadosh Baruch Hu controls everything. People who want to do things and not pay for them, eventually there is a collection agency that will collect. He has a collection agency, and they will collect exactly and according to what is due. A little bit of pain, less pain, more pain, everything is with the right measure. Missed the flight, was on the flight, didn't even think of buying a ticket to go. He just thought, I'm going to go Monday, not Sunday. All of this is becheshbon hashamayim. Then he finds out, he only has the shock or the surprise, but he doesn't have the actual experience. So what do you do to survive all these disasters? The reason Hashem brought about the Mabul back then is because we said there was so much evil. So what? So what if there was so much evil? But there's more than that. As a result of all that evil, all the three pillars for which the world stands was destroyed. Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim, there was no kindness, there was no Torah, there was no service of Hashem. The world stands on these three pillars. If these three pillars do not exist, there's no reason for this world to continue. Back then there were no three pillars. There was only evil. Today, I said before, we have the ability of learning Torah, we have the ability to do Chesed. So the rabbis tell us, Kol haroseh linatzel mechevlei Mashiach, mimlechem et Gog uMagog yasok b'Torah u'gemilut chasadim. Whoever wants to be saved or protected from all the tribulations that will occur and that are occurring now, before Mashiach comes, should occupy himself with Torah and acts of kindness. Why these two? Because these are the two to build the world. Olam Chesed Yibaneh. The majority of disasters in the world only come about because people are selfish. People are destructive. People think of themselves and not of the other. It's the exact opposite of Chesed. Hashem says, I build my world with kindness. I am kind to you. I give to you. I want you to be giving to each other, not to just be takers and receivers. But if people are only takers and receivers and they're only selfish, then the world is being destroyed. If the human being destroys himself, then the world is destroyed too. As we started off saying, everything is symbolic of our actions. So in order for the Jew to protect himself and his family from what is happening and what will still happen, unfortunately, in the near future, is to occupy himself with acts of kindness, tzedakah, to learn Torah, to support Torah. In this way, he will be building the world and not destroying the world. So I think I've covered just a little bit of some of the ideas of what's going on. I wanted you to understand that Hashem runs the world. There's a reason for everything. Everything does not always make sense to us immediately, but when Mashiach comes, we will all understand that it was all for our benefit. B'ezrat Hashem. Anybody has any questions? Yes.
Question. I was watching the movie Obsession.
A little bit, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's pretty much about the Islamic movement, the radical Islamic movement, and it seems like that's escalating more and more, and they're getting more stronger, and they're growing worldwide. Could that be part, instead of natural disasters, could that be part of coming closer towards the end as the...
Yeah, you're talking about another event or events that will be part of the end of days, and that is major confrontations or battles between Islam and Christianity, and how the combined forces of those two will be used against the Jews in the end, in the war of Gog and Magog, which involves Amalek. So that's a separate topic, but in the end, a little bit of what we said has to do with it, because there is nekama, there is revenge for everything that they've done to us in the past. There is an awakening for us, and that awakening comes about through the tool of fear that is being used to threaten us with nuclear bombs and with wars and with intifadas and the like, until we learn the lesson. And unfortunately, not too many Jews have learned the lesson. But the good news is, the way I see it, I only like to see the good in everything. And Baruch Hashem, in the past 30 years, there has been a tremendous amount of Balei Tshuva, a lot of Jews returning to the roots in Israel, in America, and in South America. And I hope that all this goodness will cover up all the mistakes that some of our brothers are making. And it's really because they're ignorant. It's not their fault. And therefore, I don't blame them, I don't accuse them. I accuse the leadership of leading them astray. Hopefully, God should give the leadership some common sense to do the right thing. Yeah. That's right. That is one of the topics we'll be discussing in the coming months. If Hashem wants us to destroy Amalek because He hates Amalek, why doesn't He destroy him Himself? Isn't that a good question? Yeah. Why does He want us to do that? So that's one of the questions we'll be talking about in the coming months. Yeah.
Christianity and Islam.
Right.
What's with these excerpts of Rambam speaking about how they paved the way to final redemption?
Well, that is another interesting point that I've made in the past, that even Christianity and Islam, who appear to be our enemies, nevertheless are there for a good reason. Ever since the destruction of the Beit Sheni, the last 2,000 years of this 6,000 years are called Yemot HaMashiach. The days of Mashiach, Hashem is preparing the world to go from paganism to monotheism. Up until then, most of the world was pagan, except for the Jews. Yeah. So therefore, there's definitely a connection between the world becoming religious all of a sudden, believing in a God. And this has something to do with the preparing the world to the belief in one God. In other words, Hashem will not just come out of the blue and say, you know what? You guys have all been wrong till now. All these idols. Only the Jews. No. There are a good number of people in this world, whether Muslim or Christian, believe in God. And that's a very good thing. So I obviously feel that there's definitely a connection. And this does not just happen because Muhammad decided, or because the students of Yeshu decided to put this new testament together. It's all min hashamayim. Nevertheless, we all still have free will, and they unfortunately use their religion as a way to torture people and to persecute people. Had they used their religion to educate people and to practice what they preach, we would have had a different kind of world. But the connection is still there. The formation of these faiths is definitely connected to the ultimate faith in one God, which will be clarified even more when Mashiach comes. That Hashem is Echad U'Shmo Echad, that there is no Trinity, and there's no false prophets, of course, and that the wishes of Hashem are not for jihad, but for coexistence and tolerance. And a lot of people are confused today in what Hashem's will is. Those who, of course, who follow the Torah, have a different idea of what Hashem expects of us. But there's still a lot of lies, a lot of hatred, a lot of bigotry. But nonetheless, you are right. There's still a connection there to the faith in one God in preparation of the days of Mashiach.